Racist cop questions black woman mid-flight, not knowing she's tracking a leak tied directly to his unit. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the main character. Karen Thompson had always believed in keeping a low profile, especially when it came to her work. As an FBI agent, she was used to being the person in the background, quietly doing her job, never seeking attention. Today, however, was different. She was on a flight to an undisclosed location, her mission in the final stages. Her eyes were focused on the documents in front of her, the confidential files detailing a massive information leak tied to a police unit. It was a case that had taken months to piece together. She had spent hours sifting through intel, tracking patterns, connecting the dots. The leak, as it turned out, led directly to someone inside the very unit that was supposed to protect and serve. That's when she noticed a man sitting 2 rows ahead of her. He was staring at her, his eyes flickering with suspicion, a furrow in his brow that made her uneasy. His uniform was unmistakable. He was a police officer, and the way he was glancing at her made her skin crawl. At first, Karen thought it might just be paranoia. But when he stood up and made his way down the aisle toward her, her instincts kicked in. She didn't flinch. She didn't react. She simply sat there, still, watching as the officer approached. "Excuse me, miss," the officer said as he stopped in front of her seat. "Is there something I can help you with?" His tone wasn't exactly friendly, and there was a clear air of authority in his voice. Karen remained composed, not allowing her nervousness to show. She had faced much worse in her line of work, but she knew the importance of keeping cool. "No, officer, I'm fine," Karen replied calmly, her voice steady. "I'm just working on a case." The officer's eyes narrowed, his suspicion growing. "A case?" he asked, as if he didn't believe her. "What kind of case?" Karen remained silent for a moment, weighing her options. She could feel the tension rising. He didn't know it, but this was the very person she had been tracking for weeks. The leak he was part of was crucial to the investigation she was leading. But she couldn't just tell him that. She had to play her cards carefully. "Just a personal matter," Karen said, hoping to end the conversation. The officer didn't seem satisfied. "I'm not sure I believe you," he said, his tone taking on a more threatening edge. "I've been watching you for a while now. You don't belong here." Karen's heart rate didn't change, but she could feel the weight of his words. He had no idea that she was the one hunting him down. The officer stood there for a moment, staring at her, trying to gauge her reaction. Karen looked him directly in the eyes, unflinching. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her. Then, just as she thought the situation was going to escalate, the flight attendant appeared at the scene, sensing the tension. "Is everything all right, sir?" the attendant asked, her voice polite but firm. The officer hesitated, his expression flickering for a moment. "Everything's fine," he muttered, taking a step back. "Just had a few questions." He turned and walked back down the aisle, leaving Karen in a state of quiet relief. She let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The situation had diffused for now, but Karen knew this wasn't the end. She was on the edge of uncovering something big, and the officer, who had no idea who she truly was just one piece of the puzzle. The flight continued on, but Karen couldn't help but wonder how long it would be before everything she had been tracking finally came to light. The rest of the flight was uneventful, but Karen couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She kept her eyes on the document in front of her, but her mind kept drifting back to the officer. It wasn't just his rude behavior that bothered her. No, it was the way he had looked at her, the way he had singled her out from the rest of the passengers. It wasn't a coincidence. She knew that. Now, she couldn't afford to let her guard down. The officer had been too interested in her for it to be a random encounter. Karen had been in enough high-stakes situations to recognize when someone was paying too much attention. Her instincts were telling her this wasn't just about a missing bag or a casual suspicion. It was something bigger, and it had to do with the investigation she was in the middle of. The leak she had been tracking was connected to a network of corruption, one that spread farther than she had initially thought. The officer was part of that web, and Karen was determined to uncover the truth. The plane continued its course, cruising at 35,000 feet. Passengers were in a relaxed mood, some sleeping, others quietly reading or watching movies. But Karen was far from relaxed. She was thinking about what would happen when the flight ended. Her mission wasn't over yet. In fact, it was about to escalate. As the hours passed, Karen remained focused, her eyes scanning the report in her hands. The officer's behavior had been strange, and it wasn't just because he had approached her. It was because, in a way, he had unknowingly confirmed something. She had been investigating a leak, and he had been connected to it. The coincidence was too big to ignore. Karen felt a twinge of frustration. She had been working on this case for months, carefully piecing together the clues, tracking down leads, and now, this officer might be the key to unlocking the entire operation. She had to stay calm. Her mind raced with possibilities. The investigation had already been complicated, but now it was personal. She couldn't let it get to her. The officer's actions had given her a new lead, but it also meant she was now in even more danger. She had to be careful. After all, she was getting closer to a truth that a lot of people would do anything to keep hidden. As the flight began its descent into the airport, Karen closed the document and slipped it into her bag. She stood up, straightening her jacket, her eyes scanning the cabin once more. She wanted to be sure that the officer wasn't paying attention to her again. Fortunately, he was seated several rows behind her now, his attention focused elsewhere. But Karen knew better than to trust. Appearances. She was about to disembark into a city she had never been to before, and she wasn't sure what she was walking into. All she knew was that the mission was about to take a dangerous turn. She needed to stay one step ahead of everyone. As the plane touched down, Karen stood up and grabbed her carry-on bag, preparing to leave the cabin. The officer was still behind her, but his presence didn't bother her now. She had more pressing matters to attend to. She walked down the aisle, her pace steady and confident, but inside, her mind was already preparing for the next step in the investigation. It was time to act, and Karen was ready to face whatever came next. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to let anyone stand in her way. Karen stepped off the plane and into the crowded terminal. The bustling energy of the airport was a sharp contrast to the calm and quiet she had maintained on the flight. She adjusted the strap of her bag over her shoulder, her mind racing with the details of her mission. She had come this far, but now the real work was about to begin. The officer she had encountered on the plane had only been one piece of the puzzle. There was much more to uncover, and Karen was determined to get to the bottom of it. She quickly navigated through the crowds, her focus entirely on the task at hand. As she made her way toward the exit, she glanced around, scanning for any signs of being followed. Her instincts told her to stay alert. Even though the officer had been momentarily distracted, she knew better than to trust that things were truly calm. The mission she was on was delicate, and there were people in the shadows who would do whatever it took to stop her from finding the truth. Once outside the airport, Karen took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs. She glanced at her phone and made a call. "It's me," she said quietly when the line clicked open. "I need backup. I'm close to something, but I don't know who I can trust yet. Meet me at the usual spot." She ended the call quickly, slipping the phone back in her bag. As she walked toward the parking lot, Karen felt the weight of the case settle more heavily on her shoulders. She had been tracking the leak for months, and now she was closer than ever to unraveling it. But the closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous things became. She had already been targeted once, and she knew that wasn't the last time. The officer from the plane, he had been too focused on her, and Karen knew that it was no coincidence. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone in his department had tipped him off. She had to move quickly, carefully, and be ready for anything. Karen had always known that being in the FBI wasn't easy, but she had never imagined it would lead her to this moment. As she got in her car, she started the engine and drove off, her eyes scanning the rearview mirror every few seconds. The streets were unfamiliar, and the sense of being watched never left her. She had to stay focused. After a short drive, Karen reached a quiet, secluded area where she had arranged to meet with her contact. It was a familiar location, one that had seen many covert meetings over the years. She parked the car, keeping an eye out for anyone who might be lurking in the shadows. As she stepped out of the vehicle, a figure approached from the darkness. "It's about time," the person said, their voice low. "I've got information that's going to change everything." Karen nodded, her expression unreadable. "I need to know everything," she replied, her voice steady. The figure handed her a manila folder, and Karen opened it carefully. The documents inside confirmed her worst fears. The officer she had encountered on the plane was just one small part of a much larger operation, one that went all the way to the top. She closed the folder slowly, her mind processing the information. This was it. This was the breakthrough she had been waiting for. But now the real danger was here. Karen knew that if the people behind the operation found out what she knew, they wouldn't hesitate to silence her. But she wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. She had come too far to turn back, and the truth was out there, waiting to be exposed. Karen sat in her car, the folder now in her lap, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just uncovered. The documents inside were more than just pieces of paper. They were a blueprint to expose an entire network of corruption that ran deep within the police force. The officer from the flight was just one small part of the puzzle. The leak she had been tracking was connected to a much larger operation, and she was finally on the verge of bringing it all to light. But the weight of the situation settled heavily on her chest. She could feel the eyes of those behind this operation already on her, even if she couldn't see them. They wouldn't let her uncover the truth without a fight. As she opened the folder again, her fingers traced over the names of officers and their connections to the ringleader. It was clear now that she wasn't just investigating a case of misconduct. This was something far more dangerous. The deeper she dug, the more complicated things became. There were people who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets, and Karen knew she was up against more than just corrupt officers. She was up against a system that had been built to protect its own, no matter the cost. As the minutes ticked by, Karen realized she couldn't stay in this parking lot much longer. She was too exposed, too vulnerable. With one last look at the documents, she closed the folder, slipped it into her bag, and started the car. She knew she needed to make her next move carefully. There was a safe house she could reach, a place where she could regroup and plan her next steps. But Karen also knew that the people she was after wouldn't give her a moment's peace. She was being hunted, and they were closing in. The streets were dark as she drove through the city, her eyes flicking between the rearview mirror and the road ahead. Every turn, every stoplight felt like a potential trap. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being followed, but she couldn't afford to take chances. She had to get to the safe house, and she had to do it without drawing attention. Finally, after what felt like hours, Karen reached the safe house. It was an unassuming building, tucked away on a quiet street, far from the noise of the city. She parked her car a few blocks away and walked the rest of the way, her eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. The safe house was secure, but Karen knew that security didn't always mean safety. As she entered the building, the familiar sound of a door clicking shut behind her gave her a sense of temporary relief. She took a deep breath and made her way down the hallway. Inside, the room was dark, lit only by the glow of a desk lamp. She walked over to the desk and placed a folder on the surface. Her mind was already working through the next steps. She had to contact her team, organize the evidence, and figure out who could be trusted. But first, she needed to process everything she had just uncovered. The scale of the operation was staggering, and the risks she was about to take were far greater than anything she had faced before. But Karen wasn't one to back down. Not when she was so close to the truth. The file in front of her was more than just evidence. It was the key to unraveling a system that had been built on lies. And Karen was determined to bring it all down, no matter the cost. As she sat in the quiet room, the weight of the mission settled in. But her resolve was stronger than ever. She would see this through, even if it meant taking on an entire corrupt system. Karen sat in the dimly lit room, her fingers tapping on the folder in front of her. The weight of everything she had uncovered was settling in, and the reality of the situation was becoming more apparent by the second. She had always known this mission would be dangerous, but now that she had the pieces in front of her, the stakes were higher than ever. The network of corruption within the police department was deep, and the people involved would go to any lengths to protect their secrets. Karen knew that. She had seen it before. She had dealt with dangerous situations, but this was different. This was bigger. The documents in the folder detailed key players, dates, and evidence that connected the dots between law enforcement officials and the illicit activities they were involved in. She studied each page carefully, her mind working fast, try to see the bigger picture. Every line of text could be a clue to taking down the whole operation. But there was still one question that lingered in the back of her mind. Who could she trust? Karen had been in this game long enough to know that trust was a luxury. In this world, loyalty was often a fleeting thing, and betrayal could come from anywhere. She had to be cautious. The people behind the leak were powerful, and they would not hesitate to strike if they suspected she was getting too close. Her phone buzzed on the desk, breaking her concentration. She picked it up, glancing at the screen. It was a message from an anonymous number. The text was short and to the point. "I know what you're looking for. Meet me at 2 a.m. at the docks." Karen's instincts told her this could be a setup, but she also knew it could be the lead she had been waiting for. She had no choice but to go. She couldn't afford to let fear dictate her actions. The clock on the wall ticked away as Karen prepared for the meeting. She gathered her things, double-checking everything in her bag: the folder, her phone, her gun. It was a precaution, just in case. She had never been one to rely on weapons, but she wasn't taking any chances tonight. As she left the safe house, the night air was cool and crisp. The streets were eerily quiet, and Karen's footsteps echoed in the silence. She made her way to her car, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of surveillance. It didn't take long for her to reach the docks. The area was abandoned, the only light coming from a flickering street lamp in the distance. She parked her car a few blocks away and approached cautiously, her senses heightened. Every shadow felt like a threat. As she neared the meeting spot, she spotted a figure standing by a shipping container. It was too dark to make out any details, but Karen's instincts told her this was the person she was supposed to meet. "You came," the figure said in a low voice. Karen nodded, her hand resting on the gun holster at her side, just in case. "I'm listening," she said, her tone steady. The figure stepped forward, pulling a small envelope from his jacket. "This is everything you need to bring them down," he said, handing it over. Karen took the envelope, feeling the weight of it in her hands. She didn't open it right away, but she knew this could be the breakthrough she needed. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice cautious. The figure's face remained hidden in the shadows. "Someone who wants to see justice served," he replied. Karen studied him for a moment, trying to gauge his sincerity. "I'll be in touch," she said, turning to leave. The figure didn't answer, and Karen didn't look back. She walked briskly to her car, her mind already racing through the possibilities. The envelope could contain crucial evidence, but it could also be another trap. She wouldn't know until she opened it, and she wasn't about to take any risks. As she drove back to the safe house, Karen's heart was pounding. She had the information, but now she needed to figure out what to do with it. She had made it this far, but the hardest part was still ahead. The game was far from over, and she knew that every move she made from here on out would be critical. She had no room for mistakes. Not now. Not when she was so close to exposing the truth. Karen arrived back at the safe house, her heart still racing from the meeting at the docks. She parked her car a few blocks away, as usual, and walked briskly to the entrance, her eyes constantly scanning the street. It was the same routine she had followed for days, but tonight something felt different. The air seemed heavier, charged with anticipation. The envelope she had received from the mysterious figure weighed heavily in her pocket, its contents potentially holding the key to everything she had been working toward. She didn't open it immediately. Her instincts told her to wait, to process everything first before making any rash decisions. As she entered the safe house, Karen locked the door behind her and took a moment to gather her thoughts. The room was still, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator in the corner. She placed the envelope on the table, then went to the window and peered outside, her thoughts swirling with uncertainty. Was this the breakthrough she had been hoping for? Or was it another dead end, another trap to lure her into a bigger conspiracy? She had to be sure. Slowly, she walked back to the table, her fingers brushing against the envelope. It felt thick, heavy with significance. She hesitated for a moment longer, then tore it open. Inside were several documents, each one filled with names, dates, and coded references. It was a goldmine of information. The first document outlined a series of covert meetings between high-ranking officers and individuals outside the police force, suspected criminals, government contractors, and others involved in illicit activities. The names on the list were familiar, and Karen recognized the patterns from her own investigation. But this was different. This wasn't just about one or two officers. This was a widespread operation, a network that reached into the highest levels of law enforcement and beyond. The next document was even more detailed, listing specific transactions, covert operations, and encrypted communications that tied several officers to criminal activities. The evidence was damning, but there was one problem. This information couldn't be used without more verification. Karen needed to confirm the details before she could move forward. She wasn't about to risk everything on something that could be fabricated. She spent hours poring over the documents, cross-referencing the names and dates with what she already knew. The puzzle pieces were starting to fall into place. The more she uncovered, the more certain she became. This wasn't just about a few bad cops. This was a full-scale operation, one that had been running for years, hidden in plain sight. But as Karen's mind raced through the possibilities, one thought kept creeping into the back of her mind. How far would they go to protect themselves? She had already seen the lengths to which they would go to cover their tracks, but now she was getting too close. The more she uncovered, the more dangerous it became. The stakes were higher than ever. If she wasn't careful, she could end up just another casualty in the line of duty, another officer silenced for knowing too much. As the night wore on, Karen finally took a step back. She knew what had to be done. She had to bring this information to the right people, but she couldn't trust anyone inside the department. Not yet. She needed to go outside, find allies who could help her expose this operation without tipping off the people behind it. It was a risky move, but it was the only way. She knew she couldn't do it alone. The next few days would be crucial. Karen had one shot at this, and she wasn't going to waste it. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to stop now. With the documents securely in her bag, Karen stood up, her resolve stronger than ever. The mission was far from over, and the real work was just beginning. The next few days were a blur for Karen as she worked tirelessly to plan her next move. The documents she had uncovered weighed heavily on her mind, each page a stark reminder of how deep the corruption ran within the police force. She knew that exposing this network wouldn't be easy. In fact, it could be dangerous. But Karen had never backed down from a challenge before, and she wasn't about to start now. She spent hours in the safe house, poring over the files and cross-referencing every piece of information she had. The names of officers and criminals were linked to one another in ways she hadn't even realized before. But there was still one thing she had to figure out: how to bring this information to the right people without alerting the wrong ones. Karen couldn't trust anyone inside the department. Not yet, at least. The leak she had uncovered was far-reaching, and anyone could be compromised. Her only option was to go outside the system, find allies who weren't involved in the operation, and expose the truth from the outside. But who could she trust? The question lingered in the back of her mind as she made her plans. She needed to contact a journalist, someone who could investigate the information independently and present it to the public. But it wasn't just any journalist she needed. She had to find someone with credibility, someone who could withstand the inevitable pressure from the police department once they realized what was happening. She made a list of potential contacts, but none of them felt like the right choice. She had been burned before, and she wasn't about to risk everything on someone who might back out when the pressure came. The clock was ticking, and Karen knew that the longer she waited, the more dangerous it became. She couldn't afford to hesitate. The corrupt officers were getting desperate, And if they figured out that she had the evidence, they would stop at nothing to silence her. Karen took a deep breath and reached for her phone. She knew she had to call. The call went through after several rings, and Karen didn't waste any time. "It's me," she said when the line clicked open. "I need your help. It's urgent." The voice on the other end of the line responded with quiet urgency. "What's going on?" Karen quickly explained the situation, her words steady but filled with resolve. "I've uncovered something big, something that goes all the way to the top. I need someone who can help me get this information to the public without putting anyone in danger. Can you do that?" The person on the other end was silent for a moment, weighing the situation. "I'll help you," they finally said, their voice firm. "But we need to move fast. Once they catch wind of what you have, there won't be time to second-guess." Karen nodded, though the person couldn't see her. "I understand. Let's make it happen." With the plan set in motion, Karen knew the hardest part was still ahead of her. The people involved in this operation would stop at nothing to protect themselves, and the deeper she got, the more dangerous things would become. But she wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. She had the truth, and that was something no one could take from her. The next few hours were a whirlwind as Karen and her contact coordinated their efforts. They discussed every detail, from the best way to get the story out to the safest way to verify the information. Time was of the essence, and Karen could feel the pressure mounting. As she hung up the phone, she couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was about to hit. Everything she had worked for, everything she had uncovered, was about to come to light. And once it did, there would be no turning back. Karen stood up from the desk, her mind focused and clear. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to stop until the truth was exposed. Karen sat at the desk, her eyes glued to the screen as she waited for the next update. The plan was in motion, but she couldn't afford to let her guard down. Every moment counted now. She could feel the tension building as the hours passed. She had done everything she could to prepare, contacting the right people, organizing the evidence, and ensuring the information would get out. But Karen knew this wasn't going to be as simple as just dropping the truth into the hands of the public. The network she was targeting was ruthless, and they would not hesitate to protect their interests at any cost. She glanced at her phone, checking for any messages or calls from her contact. Nothing yet. It was getting late, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was running out of time. If she didn't act fast, everything she had worked for could slip away. She thought back to the documents she had uncovered. Names, dates, operations, all connected to the same corrupt network. It was all right there, laid out in front of her. But Karen knew that exposing it wasn't just about the facts. It was about making sure the truth reached the right people. People who would take action, people who could make sure those responsible would finally be held accountable. Her phone buzzed suddenly, breaking her concentration. She picked it up quickly, her heart racing. It was her contact. "The story's ready," the voice on the other end said, sounding urgent. "But we need to move fast. I've got a meeting with the editor in an hour, and once they get hold of this, there's no turning back." Karen's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the moment she had been working toward for so long. But even with everything in place, she couldn't ignore the risks. Once the story went public, the pressure would be immense. People would be watching, those who wanted to stop it, and those who wanted to see it succeed. There was no room for error now. "Are we clear on everything?" Karen asked, her voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline surging through her. "Yes," the contact replied. "The story's ready to be published, and the evidence is solid. We're taking this straight to the public. No turning back." Karen nodded, though no one could see her. "I'll be ready," she said, her voice firm. As she hung up the phone, she stood up and paced the room, her mind racing through the final details. She couldn't afford to be complacent now. The people involved in this operation were dangerous, and they wouldn't hesitate to retaliate. But Karen had no intention of backing down. She had come too far, and the truth was too important. She couldn't let fear stop her from doing what needed to be done. Her phone buzzed again, this time with an email notification. It was from her contact, containing the final draft of the story. Karen clicked it open, scanning the details quickly. Every word was carefully crafted, every detail accounted for. It was a bold move, but it was the only way to make sure the story got the attention it deserved. After reading through it, she felt a surge of determination. This was the moment that could change everything. She had done her part. Now, it was time to let the world know. The clock was ticking, and Karen knew she didn't have much time left before the story went live. She took a deep breath and hit send on the email, knowing that once it was out there would be no going back. The fate of the investigation, the people involved, and even her own safety were all about to be put on the line. But Karen had always known that this was what it would take. It wasn't just about bringing down a corrupt network. It was about standing up for what was right. And no matter what happened next, Karen was ready to face whatever came her way. The moment Karen clicked send on the email, a heavy weight seemed to settle in her chest. She stood there for a moment, staring at the screen, her mind racing through every possible outcome. The story was out there now, and with it, everything she had worked for. There was no turning back. She knew that the next few hours would be crucial. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from a news app. She opened it, her eyes scanning the headline. Explosive leaks expose corruption within law enforcement. The story was live. The article was everywhere, and the details were already beginning to spread. Karen felt a rush of mixed emotions, relief, excitement, and an undeniable sense of dread. This was the moment she had been waiting for, but it was also the moment when everything could fall apart. She had taken down powerful people before, but nothing like this. The network she was up against was vast and deeply entrenched in the system. As the hours passed, Karen kept checking her phone, waiting for the inevitable fallout. The media picked up the story, and the pressure mounted. It wasn't just about the truth anymore. It was about making sure the story stayed in the spotlight long enough for real change to happen. But Karen knew the risks. The people she had exposed weren't going to sit back and let this slide. They would retaliate, and they would stop at nothing to silence her and anyone else involved. As the evening wore on, Karen received another call from her contact. The story's everywhere, they said. It's making waves, but you need to be careful. We're already getting threats. The pressure is building. Karen nodded, even though the person couldn't see her. I know. I'm ready, she replied, her voice steady despite the tension gnawing at her. We've done what we needed to do. Now we just have to hold on and see this through. She knew it wasn't over. Not yet. The hard part was just beginning. As the night turned to morning, the phone calls and messages kept coming. Some were from allies, others from anonymous sources, all giving her information and support. But there were others, threats, warnings, veiled threats that made her heart race. She couldn't afford to ignore them, but she wouldn't let fear control her. Karen had always been prepared for the consequences of doing the right thing. She had known it would come to this, and she had prepared herself. But the truth had to come out. She couldn't stop now. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an unknown number. She opened it, reading the text quickly. We know what you've done. You'll regret this. It was a chilling reminder of just how deep this went. Karen took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was what she had been working toward, what she had been preparing for. She wasn't going to let threats stop her now. The only way to ensure that the story stayed in the public eye was to keep moving forward, to keep applying pressure, and to make sure that those responsible were held accountable. Karen knew there would be more twists, more danger ahead. But she was ready. She had come this far, and there was no turning back. With the story out in the open, the fight for justice had only just begun.